And then finally, we'll go right to the tippy top of the peninsula, Gills Rock. You have the Death Store. Maritime Museum underwent that name change, I think, just last year. And a lot of changes have happened there with the new augmented reality pieces that are there. What are some of the other things that people can expect if they check out the Death Store Maritime Museum this year?
Well, this year we've moved some exhibits around. We're bringing in some new exhibits that kids can interact with about fishing, and specifically not commercial fishing, but just fishing. And we're talking about some for younger kids. And we've highlighted the Fresnel lens that we have there. We've moved it to the front of the museum, and we've made some changes in the back area of the museum. We will be bringing new exhibits to Death Store every season from here on out. That's a plan, because a lot of people make that trek by, and they've like, well, I went there 5 years ago, nothing's probably changed. No, we want something new there every season, and this year we'll have some fishing exhibits, new specifically for some activities that kids can do. So hopefully that will work out, but we're open too if people have ideas on what they'd like to see. But the Northern Door community has really been about that commercial fishing and recreational fishing, and that's what we're going to more often than not highlight. Especially we have the fishing, the Tug Hope in the museum, and there's even some discussion about maybe an interactive with that at some point. That won't be this season, but it's certainly on the radar for the future. But this year, look for some activities that kids can do in there, and we hope to have those in place. We'll have new things there by 4th of July.
And how important has it been to really, kind of over the last couple of years, really put some focus on that museum and give it a little extra attention and change some things up to draw in some visitors?
Well, that's absolutely correct. We want to make sure that people are aware that that's really the origins of the Door County Maritime Museum. This property here in Sturgeon Bay is a much larger museum, but the museum itself, its very origins began in Gills Rock along the shores of Death Store. So that is really our home. That's our starting point.
And 50 years ago, this year, 10 people got together, and they really wanted to open a maritime museum in Door County, and that's where it started. Those 10 people had to go to the bank and sign a guarantee for $1,000 each to get that first $10,000 worth of operating capital to get this museum started. We're grateful that most of those folks are still with us. Some of them aren't, but that's the core group, that foundation that built this maritime museum for the county that now spreads across 3 different ports of call. But it's that one story of the maritime history of this county. The water defines everyone. It interacts with us as something. We all have some connection to it if you live or work in Door County, and the water does definitely define who we are, what we're about, and what we experience every day of life in Door County. So whether you're working on the next Great Lakes freighter to be built at Bay Ship in Cantieri, or you're taking your grandkids out fishing for the day, or dealing with traffic, trying to get through Egg Harbor on an August afternoon, the water brings everyone here and really is the focus of this county. And this is where the history is kept and the stories are told. And while there's a certain number of exhibits are on display at Gills Rock, and a certain number of exhibits are on display here and at Cana, it's the stories behind those things. So I would urge anyone who visits any of our properties to ask the docents, or send us some questions via social media ahead of time for a cool, interesting story that's kind of hidden in the museum. There are several here that when you just start to peel back the layers and read, it's just fascinating what's gone on in this community over the last several hundred years.
Yeah, the current exhibit here in Sturgeon Bay is The Water Defines Us, DCMM at 50. It collected some of the stories from the founders of the museum and the folks who have led this organization over the last 50 years. But we are constantly looking for new stories. And so, as Kevin said, if there are stories that you want to share about your experiences in the maritime industry in Door County, please share those with us. And We take those stories very seriously. We believe that people have entrusted those stories with us, and we care for them, and we want to make sure that those stories are able to be communicated to future generations.
We had somebody donate to us some photos from their grandfather, I think, who was in World War II in the Army. Well, he happened to be stationed aboard LT-145, the tug John Purvis. He took photos of his experience. He was aboard the tug when they made that trip from Duluth, Minnesota, all the way to Seattle and then to the Aleutian Islands, and he drew a map that showed every time they put into port. So we have that map, and we have his photos and a picture of him. And in the course of that, we noticed in some of the photographs that there were some non-Army people wearing very Navy-looking uniforms aboard the tugboat. Well, a little bit of research turns out they were most likely Coast Guardsmen that were doing the navigation and the driving of the tugboat. Our first week here, someone sent us a dinner invitation from Latham Shipbuilding back in the 1940s, and it was to celebrate the construction of one of the patrol craft, the anti-submarine patrol craft they built here. But that particular one had been sunk by an Italian submarine the year before. And it happened to be the very first patrol craft sunk during the war, and I think actually maybe the only one. And you start digging into that history, and it turns out that the captain of the Italian ship that sank it, or the Italian submarine that sank it, was put on trial for wasting a torpedo on such a worthless boat. So there's some interesting stories that, and the people who received that dinner invitation, they worked to build that boat right here in Sturgeon Bay, and their families are still here. So it's just interesting that how, it's just our small community here, but the stories stretch out across the world, because that's where what they built here went. They went everywhere.
And once again, beginning in May, you'll be able to visit you can probably do it all in a weekend. Sturgeon Bay Museum, Tug John Purvis, Cannon Island Lighthouse, and the Death's Door Maritime Museum in Gills Rock. Kevin, Sam, thanks so much for having us today.
Thank you very much.
I'm Tim McColes reporting for DoorCountyDailyNews.com.